Hello, 4th and 5th graders. It's getting exciting. It's time for step 9, where we begin to record our narration. The podcast is really starting to take shape now. As we move into this step, you're going to see that your podcast is going to really start to look like a podcast. So let's talk about what we need to get done. In this step, it is your turn to talk. It's your turn to use your script and record the part that is yours. Now, before you do that, you want to make sure that you really practice your script. Figure out how you're going to say it. Learn the words so that it comes out smoothly and it doesn't sound like you're just reading along very slowly, but actually really more like you're just talking, like you're saying it for the first time. Then you want to make sure you find a nice, good spot to record. Remember not to do it in the middle of a room where it's loud or other people are around, but someplace where it's quiet, where there's the sound can really get pulled into the microphone instead of bouncing off the walls. And then you record and you read your script into GarageBand. And I'm going to show you right now what that looks like. Into GarageBand and set up our studio so that we're ready to go. All right, so over here I've got two tracks. One has my interview on it, and then the other has the parts that I pulled down that I cut out in step 8 yesterday. I'm going to need a third track, one for myself. So let's add a third track. Make sure that the vocal hall is turned down, because if not, it sounds like you're standing in the middle of a giant room and it's all echoey. Head back to the track view. And now you'll see that we have 1, 2, 3. So let's name these, because that's going to help me figure out which one is which. So I'm going to push and hold on top of tap on top of the microphone. I just tapped right here, and I get this menu, and I'm going to tap on rename. And then I'm just going to call it what I want to call it. I want to call this the interview, because that's what this is. Okay, so that's the interview. Now I'm going to tap, and I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to call this, I could call it subject, or maybe I'll just call it dad, because it is really my dad. And then this one, double tapped instead of single tap. This one I'm going to call narrator. There. Whoops, that didn't work. Hang on. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so now I have interview, my dad's, or the subject, and the narrator. So I'm going to make sure that I record into this track. And the reason we do this is so that we can edit it really easily. If everything's on one track, then if I move one thing, it ends up squishing something else and recording over it. And I don't want to do that. I want to have two separate spaces, one for me, one for my dad. All right, now I'm ready to record, except not really, because I'm missing something. I'm missing my most important thing, which is my script. So let's get that on to, here we go. We're going to make sure that you have Notability open on your taskbar, and then open it in a side screen. And now I have my script, I have my recording, and I am ready to go. All right, I've got my script open. I've got my GarageBand open. I'm just going to practice this just once or twice just to make sure that I've got it right. All right, so I'm going to say, my dad always loved the idea of the Mississippi River. He had a romantic idea about what it'd be like to live on the river. Did I do that right? Yeah, I think I did that right. I think I'm ready to go. I don't want it to sound forced. I don't want it to sound like I'm reading. I want it to sound like I'm really saying it. So my dad always loved the idea of the Mississippi River. He had a romantic idea about what it'd be like to live on the river. Yeah, that's okay. All right, so I'm going to tap on record, and then I'm going to record right here. Now it's going to do a count in for me. It's going to go 3, 2, 1, and then it's going to record. So here we go.
Decided I had to have it.
Whoop. Okay, what was the problem there? This is a great lesson here. Okay, what was the problem? Well, I didn't have my starting button at the beginning. In fact, what I did was record over something that I was. So this is a great example of what not to do. So I'm actually going to not edit this video, and I'm going to leave it in there. So I'm going to delete that because I don't want it. I'm actually going to close this so I have a little bit more space. And I'm going to make sure that my cursor is in the beginning because that's where I want to do my recording. Go figure. All right, let's try that again. My dad always loved the idea of the Mississippi River. He had a romantic idea about what it would be like to live on the river. All right. That's it. Let's listen. How did I do? My dad always loved the idea of the Mississippi River. He had a romantic idea about what it would be like to live on the river. All right, that sounds pretty good. Now I am going to. Now I gotta say my sound is not super great. I think I'm not sitting in the best spot, but we're gonna leave it as is. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start assembling it. So if I look at my script, it says my dad always loved the idea of the Mississippi River. That's me. And then he says he wanted to put an engine on a raft and go down south. And that's what this part here is. So now I want those two parts to be next to each other. So I'm going to grab this part and I'm going to bring it over here. And I'm going to put them together. Maybe even on top of each other a little. Well, no, I'm going to put them together. And let's see now what it sounds like. My dad always loved the idea of the Mississippi River. He had a romantic idea about what it would be like to live on the river.
I just loved the idea of building a raft, putting some kind of engine on it, and going down south.
Hey, that kind of sounds like a podcast. I said this, he said this, and now it's my turn to say this. So let's get started. This is starting to take shape. This is really cool. Okay, next section. This idea stuck with him and it enchanted him. My dad knew a family that loved by... Oops, that doesn't say the right thing. My dad knew a family that lived by the river. He would go to their house and talk about the river and listen to their stories. And the more he listened, the more the dream grew in his mind. All right, I think I'm ready to record, so let's do this. Here we go. This idea stuck with him. It enchanted him. My dad knew a family that lived by the river. He would go to their house and talk about the river and listen to their stories, and the more he listened, the more his dream grew in his mind. Okay, I like it. Let's listen to it. The idea stuck with him. It enchanted him. My dad knew a family that lived by the river. He would go to their house and talk about the river and listen to their stories, and the more he listened, the more his dream grew in his mind. You know what? I can hear myself stumble in that one. I also recorded that on the wrong track, so I'm going to actually delete that one. I can do better than that. So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to make sure the correct track is highlighted, and I am going to try it again. All right, here we go.
Kind of engine on it and going down south.
This idea stuck with him. It enchanted him. My dad knew a family that lived by the river. He would go to their house and talk about the river and listen to their stories. And the more he listened, the more the dream grew in his mind. All right, let's listen to that one.
Going down south.
This idea stuck with him. It enchanted him. My dad knew a family that lived by the river. He would go to their house and talk about the river and listen to their stories. And the more he listened, the more the dream grew in his mind. Okay, that's pretty good. But if I listen to this, notice there's kind of a big gap here, isn't there? So listen to what that sounds like.
Down south.
Gap. This idea... Yeah, that doesn't work, does it? So let's fix that by bringing these two closer together and seeing what that sounds like.
Going down south.
This idea stuck with him. It enchanted him. Did you hear me? You could hear my breath in there, couldn't you? I certainly could. So I'm going to actually cut that off a little bit. I'm going to cut it so that I don't hear that part. And let's go.
South.
This idea stuck with him. Ooh, but that's a little too close, isn't it? I'm almost talking on top of him. So I'm going to pull it out just a little bit and give just a pause.
Down south.
This idea stuck with him. It enchanted him. Much better. Okay, so you can see how there's got to be a little bit of ins and outs and messing with it just to make sure that it sounds just right. That we're not cutting off any words or leaving too many weird sounds or anything like that. Okay, so what comes next? Well, let's put in the next piece. One day they said the Louise was for sale. That's down here. I'm going to grab it. I'm going to bring it to the right spot. And let's go. My dad knew a family that lived by the river. He would go to their house and talk about the river and listen to their stories. And the more he listened, the more the dream grew in his mind.
And one day they said the Louise was for sale.
That's pretty good. But again, there's kind of a dead spot here, isn't there? So I'm going to move this back a little bit, and let's see how that sounds. The dream grew in his mind. Oh, well, that didn't work at all, did it? If I did that, I'd be cutting myself off. This is a very common mistake that I see a lot of kids make. Either they cut themselves off or they cut their subject off because they're not listening very carefully. So make sure you're really listening very, very carefully. In his mind.
And one day they said the Louise was for sale.
Oh, I really like that. That sounds awesome. So now I'm going to record right here. And I'm going to record the part where it says, so later that night, he went down to the river and snuck onto the Louise. He crawled all over it, looking in and out of it. Okay. Crawled all over it, looking in and out of it. Yeah, I think that's right. Okay. Here we go.
The Louise was for sale.
So later that night, he went down to the river and snuck onto the Louise. He crawled all over it, looking in and out of it. And then what happens? Well, then let's listen. So later that night, he went down to the river and snuck onto the Louise. He crawled all over it, looking in and out of it.
Decided I had to have it.
Okay, that's pretty good. I'm still stuck on this part where he doesn't say, I decided. He said, and decided he had to have it. So maybe I need to be the one to record the part where he says, and he decided. Okay, so I'm going to delete this one. And I'm going to move this one up, move it out of the way. And I'm going to set my cursor here again. I'm going to record one more time. And this time I'm going to say, and he decided at the end so he can say, I had to have it.
The Louise was for sale.
So later that night, he went down to the river and snuck onto the Louise. He crawled all over it, looking in and out of it. And he decided, all right, I think that's going to be a little bit better. Let's bring this in. And let's test it. This is the really important thing. This is what a lot of students don't do, is they're not really thinking about testing and retesting and recording and re-recording. If it doesn't sound right, don't stick with it. Get it and make it again. I want it to sound right, not be the first thing or the fastest thing. Sometimes, in order to make something really good, it takes a little time and a little effort. So let's try this.
This was for sale.
So later that night, he went down to the river and snuck onto the Louise. He crawled all over it, looking in and out of it. And he decided,
I had to have it.
Well, that's pretty good, except for there's kind of a pause here. I'm not really liking how long this pause is in between. He should say that right after I say this. So I'm going to close this up, and I'm going to make sure I'm looking at those little waves and those little dots to make sure that I'm not cutting those off. And then I'm going to bring in my dad right here, and let's see how that sounds.
And
he decided,
I had to have it.
oh, I really like this. I think this is really good. Now look, I want you to notice a couple of things about what we've got here. I'm going to move my script out of the way. Okay. When we have a podcast, it should be a lot like this. It should have big chunks of the narrator talking and little chunks of your subject talking. Big narrators, little subjects, back and forth and back and forth. Remember, this is your podcast, which means you need to be the one who's telling the story. They'll help you tell the story, but you're telling their story. So make sure that this is what I see. I shouldn't see it flipped. I shouldn't see it reversed. I shouldn't see tons of them and then a little bit of you. I should see a lot of you and a little bit of them. This is a really common mistake that a lot of students make, and I often send them back to start over again with their script because they've done so much of their subject and very little of themselves. So make sure it looks just like this. Lots of you and a little bit of them. And as you go, you're building your podcast. When you're done with this, you're done with most of your podcast. All we really have left is to edit it a little bit, make sure it sounds right, and add music. And we're done. So nice job. You guys have been doing a great job. Keep it up and have fun, because this is the fun step.